What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Beyond the Wire podcast. I'm your host, Tim Keller. Along with me is Mr. Matt Disher. Now, Matt, I asked you before we started recording, you said you're feeling much better. You still can't smell. You can still taste sweet and salty, correct?
Yeah, you got to remember that your smell and your taste buds work. Your olfactory senses and your taste buds work hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
So the funny thing is, like, I can drink coffee. I can taste that it's bitter. It's coffee.
Mm-hmm.
I can eat a popsicle and it's sweet. I can't taste it though.
So if I blindfolded you and gave you like an orange creamsicle popsicle, and then the next one was like a strawberry shortcake,
right?
You gave me popsicles.
They'd both be the same thing. They
wow.
both taste sweet. I wouldn't have any flavor though. So that's the weird thing is, like, I'm eating food that I'm like, oh yes, I love chicken tenders and French fries, and I'm eating them. I'm like, they both taste the same. The textures are different.
Now's the time to gross out the wife and kids. Really start eating some gross stuff,
Here's the thing about me though, Tim, that you got to know is that I eat literally anything. Like, yeah. I am not a picky eater. So I thought about the same thing. Like, I should try things that I wouldn't otherwise try. And I started thinking about that. You see these lists that pop up on Facebook, like, you get a point for every one food that you won't try. I'm like, I'll eat all of these. Like, I'll literally eat almost anything. I don't know of many foods that I shy away from. So I can't play any pranks. I did on the first day that I realized I couldn't taste or smell. I did take a shot of lemon juice just to see. Okay. And that was pretty weird. Took a big shot of lemon juice. Nothing happened.
It's definitely different. That's weird.
Yeah. I'd like to. I do still want to try the horseradish thing because it's so aromatic. I want to put some raw horseradish in my mouth and just see. I mean, it'll probably still burn my sinuses, but I almost feel like I need that. Like, maybe that'll kick everything back into gear and get it moving. But yeah, I am 95% better. My wife's still fighting the good fight, but I think that we're we're on the mend.
And how's your son?
He had a fever for half of a day, and kids. He has more energy now. Yeah. He had more energy through his positive COVID tests than he has when he's not positive for COVID. So it's very strange. I mean, you wouldn't even know that he had it. So,
wow, that's good. That's great to hear.
To be a kid again, right?
Yeah, absolutely. My daughter just got her second shot yesterday. She's feeling mild side effects. So
yeah,
but she'll get through that as well. She's a tough girl.
And the weird thing now is that, like, we're talking to the doctors because we're like, so we want to get the vaccine. They're like, wait 90 days. Because I guess you have the antibodies now, wait 90 days. Otherwise, there might be like a weird reaction. I don't know if that's we don't know what to do with this. We don't know from past experience yet, or if it's just one of those things where you have the same antibodies that the vaccine will give you. So sit tight.
Yeah.
So I intend to get vaccinated. I just simply can't do it quite yet.
Yeah, I didn't know that was a thing, but
yeah.
I would say I was in kind of your neck of the woods. I was in Canton over the weekend. I went out there for an expo, got to meet some fantastic people, had a good weekend. But as Matt said, to be a kid again, I can't tell you the last time I just took off in a dead sprint, like 0 to 100. Well, in Canton, there is the Pro Football Hall of Fame. A bunch of us went there. Out front, there is a smaller turfed field. And somebody had a football with him, so we decided, hey, let's go out here and play around a little bit. Somebody asked Tim to go run a route. Tim stepped hard to the right, about 10 yards into his route, and was going to cut back to the inside of the field. And my body says, we don't do this no more. And
what is this?
My lower abdominal, I pulled something there. It is I'm day 3 now since the incident, and it's still tender. It's getting better, but it was one of those moments where I immediately go, A, should have stretched. B, I'm not 18 again. Like, I can't do this. I'm not out here trying to make the NFL. Like, just run a nice slow route, catch the pass, and jog back.
This is what my dad always says. And he's in his mid 70s, late 70s. He's always like, "Oh, I'm still 19 years old in my head."
In your head,
it's just my body's not cooperating because I do the same stuff. I'll go out and pretend like I ran with my son's baseball team. We had a competition, two sides. We split the team in two during a practice this last season, and I was one of the assistant coaches. And we had a hitting competition because we thought that our group that we were hitting with was going to be the winning team. Like we were going to do a little competition. Whoever could hit the best wouldn't have to run to the flagpole, which was about 500 yards away.
Mm-hmm.
And my team lost, and I took off running with my team, and I beat them all. I beat them all to the flagpole and back. It's a 500-meter total run, so it's not there and back. By the time I got back, I literally thought that I was dying. I just went and sat on the bench and drank some water and pretended like, hey, good jog, guys. But I thought I was dying. Like I thought I was going to keel over and die. And my wife was sitting there watching the practice. I was like, just in case anything happens to me, this is what happened. But I'm not a little kid anymore. Stupid.
I had a niece. She was relatively not let go, but she was relatively back from being in the Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
Within like 4 months, and the whole family decided we were going to do a 5K together. And so she started talking a little bit of smack to me, saying how she was going to beat me. I'm old. I've put on weight since I was young. I can't run anymore. And I said, listen, I don't have to train a day. And there's not a chance in this world you will beat me. I will break both of my hips outrunning you. It won't happen.
Oh, man.
By the way, over 1,000 runners, I came in the top 100. So yeah, she 100% didn't beat me, but it wasn't going to happen. Well, this is something that's come up a couple times now over the past few weeks, over the past few months now. We knew the withdrawal from Afghanistan was going to happen. It was a matter of time. And we saw within this past calendar week, the withdrawal has taken place. And very quickly, the Taliban has moved back in to assume control of Afghanistan. I've read plenty of reports, the Taliban saying they don't want to have any issues or drama or enemies out there. They plan to allow women to have the rights under Sharia law. I'm not an expert on this. I couldn't tell you what all that means. I know that before we stepped in, there were women not being able to go to school. There were women that wouldn't be able to dress however they wanted to dress. I know that a reporter from Afghanistan, a female reporter, over these past 20 years grew up in essentially a free country, got to go to school, got to go to college, became a journalist. And I think that's one of the many things that need to be highlighted, that if for nothing else, these past 20 years has been a shining light, a beacon to the people of this country. And hopefully things can stay a little bit more like that and not go back to the way they were. But Matt, you've pulled a couple articles here about that we want to cover. We're going to talk about this more in depth later on in the podcast. And I'm sure it's going to come up in the coming weeks as well with certain guests wanting to speak their mind about this as well. But the first article we have, again, off military.com, is billions spent on Afghan army ultimately benefited the Taliban. Now, I know this has been a huge thing the past 48 hours or so. Mm-hmm. You see it on social media, on the news. I forget the number of Humvees. I actually just read it this morning. The estimated number of Humvees that has now fallen into the hands of the Taliban. You've seen weapon caches, mortars, rockets, drones. There's the video of them dancing around in the gym.
Right.
Which, by the way, I forget his name. We had a personal trainer on here a few months back.
Yeah.
He might be able to go over there. Those guys look like they had bad technique. It's a great business opportunity.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, that video was not that any of the situation is comical, but that video was very comical, watching people who have apparently never used gym equipment or lifted weights in their entire lives. It was strange. It was very strange video.
Yeah, it was different. Yeah, it was very different. So built and trained at a 2-decade cost at $83 billion, Afghan security forces collapsed so quickly and completely, in some cases without a shot fired, that the ultimate beneficiary of the American investment turned out to be the Taliban. They grabbed not only political power, but also U.S. supplied firepower, guns, ammunitions, helicopters, and more. So $83 billion over the past 20 years. Not all of that is wrapped up in this equipment, in these firearms, things like that. A lot of that was the training and things of that nature. But yeah, I mean, this is going to be a big deal. These type of videos and photos are really what's stirring the pot right now for a lot of people.
There are a couple of different classes or groups of people that we can bring into this conversation. There are, the veterans who served in Afghanistan over the course of the last 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see on social media, it's reminiscent of what happened with the fall of Saigon and Vietnam. For years, men and women were serving there, losing their lives, getting injured, being put in harm's way, et cetera, only for our forces to just back out and leave. So there's this one camp of people that are frustrated about that. But I think that the larger camp of people, you don't have to have served in Afghanistan to be a little bit frustrated with what's happening right now with the equipment. I'll use an example here. I'll tell a little bit of a story. And I shared this on my personal Facebook page the other day. You're talking about millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of equipment now falling into what we consider enemy hands. And this is United States military equipment. It's rockets, mortars, vehicles, weapons, you name it. It's all the stuff that we are ultimately very protective over. The story I'm going to tell is this, that I was an E3. I was a Lance Corporal in the Marine Corps about a year and a half into my service. And I was with an amphibious raid unit, Fox Company, 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines. And what we did was like the amphibious raids on the little black Zodiac boats. We'd get dropped off in the ocean 20, 30 miles off a coast and then come in, sneak in the middle of the night, hit an objective on land, and then zip back out in the boats. And because of that, we had to be all camouflaged up, and we had to waterproof certain sensitive gear. And of course, that we were carrying around night vision goggles and things like that. Night vision goggles, it was my understanding back then that these things, the ones that we carried, were $7,000 or $10,000. Somebody corrected me the other day and said that they were about $4,000 or $5,000, but who knows? I don't know what the DoD pays for them or paid for them back then. These are serialized gear, along with other serialized gear like your weapons. It has a serial number on it. Essentially, it has to be accounted for. So I had to wrap my night vision goggles into a Glad bag, like a trash bag, because that's how we carried them in my backpack. And the reason for that is because we were spending so much time in the salt water. You didn't want these things to get all messed up in the ocean when you're soaking wet. So I left these during a briefing at a gear dump, weapons dump. So I had a gear guard. For anybody who doesn't know, when you step away from your weapon, the only time you ever step away from your weapons or your serialized gear is when you have an armed gear guard watching all your stuff for you. So we'd step away to eat lunch or whatever. We'd go into a building and do a briefing, and we'd have to leave all our stuff. Well, I left my weapon with all the rest of my squad's weapons and my night vision goggles inside of a trash bag in this gear dump. And police called the area. They were picking up trash. Somebody picked them up and threw them in a trash can or threw them in a dumpster. And I came back out and my stuff was missing, and it took us several hours to find it. But through all of this, the point of this story is that we started talking about, because it's my serialized gear, we started talking about how I would be in trouble, even though I wasn't necessarily at that moment responsible for the loss of this equipment. This was let's call it a $5,000 piece of equipment that is now missing. Somebody could have picked it up. They're going to go sell it to somebody, what have you. I'm a young 19-year-old Marine thinking, like, my career is over. I'm going to get dragged through the mud for this because it's the rules. And I knew it was the rules too. But I think the frustrating part for the everyman, the every person that wears the uniform here, is that we're watching, and I'm not gonna point fingers at government or politicians. This is a marked failure for years and years and years, that there is a loss of traction or handling or custody of our equipment out there. We're giving this stuff away. We've been doing this. We've been arming our enemies for decades. But here we are now. We're gonna have to face this somewhere in the future. Somebody's gonna have to face this in the future. That this potential enemy force is going to be using these weapons against us. But as a young 19-year-old Marine, I had to be worried for my career because my night vision goggles were lost at $4,000 or $5,000. We just gave weapons and material to the enemy in the name of hundreds of millions of dollars potentially. I don't even think anybody has any idea. Now, I think the frustrating part about this is that nobody's going to swing for this. Nobody will face the court. Probably. I'd be shocked if they do. I don't know who that would be. Again, I'm not blaming an administration. I'm not blaming any group of people. I'm just saying that I think that this falls hand in hand with, on our last podcast, I believe we were talking about last year, and people fell into two camps last year. They either didn't trust the media or they didn't trust their government, local or federal. And I think that this is the stuff that plays into why people are distrustful of the systems around them in many cases, it is because they don't always do the right thing. They're not always doing the right thing by the American people. And in this case, where's the accountability for all this equipment that is now essentially in enemy hands?
Yeah,
I'll get off my soapbox.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that probably the toughest thing for me to watch was the individuals trying to hold on to the side of planes as they were leaving the Afghan airports, and then seeing those individuals, obviously falling off the planes, not being able to hang on, and falling to their death. I mean, it's
Right.
crazy to think that they believe things are going to get so bad that they'd rather take the chance of trying to hold on to a plane in flight. And even if they somehow held on, once it got to altitude, they're not going to be able to breathe, and they're going to freeze. It's death either way.
Well, and both parties in that situation. I mean, imagine being the pilots of that plane. You might be aware that there's a group of people around. You are aware there's a group of people around the airplane. You probably have no idea that somebody's hanging on to it. So, and what are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to stop right there on the tarmac? At that point, they don't know who's good and bad. If you've ever been in any sort of combat zone, airplanes don't just take off like they do out of the airport down the street.
Yeah.
They get out of there because there are potential threats on the ground. But then you've got the people on the ground who, if these are people that have been working with the U.S. forces, which I've read a couple of stories on this so far, some of the translators who were working with American forces just months ago were executed out in front of their own houses.
Yes.
By the Taliban. So these people are there's probably a few people that just want to get the heck out of there. They don't want to watch the downturn, the downfall. But then there are other people who are legitimately, them and their families are legitimately afraid of what happens hereafter. And I think another part of this conversation, perhaps later on in our podcast today, is, the bigger picture here is, could we stay there forever? No.
Yeah.
And that's a whole other conversation. But, if anybody's listening or watching this, I'd love to hear your comments, and we can put those up on the screen as well. I think it's always good to hear what other perspectives there are that are out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I heard stories of, still current duty or veterans that had worked with some of these interpreters, during their time in country, still remain in contact with these individuals. And when this all started to happen, they would reach out, and some of them were hearing from these interpreters, and they would reach out to other individuals or put it out there on social media. Hey, we promised this individual, once we were done, they're coming home, they're coming with us. They're coming back. Yep. And, please, for the love of God, they're at gate 3. Somebody go get them.
Yep.
And, no responses, and then radio silence from said interpreter. And, hopefully things turned out okay, but it seems to not be going that way.
Right.
The next article we have here is how many more American lives. Biden stands by Afghan withdrawal amid turmoil. So President Biden on Monday stood by his decision to withdraw the final U.S. troops from Afghanistan. He faced increasingly cutting criticism about the pullout, from both sides. It was roughly a 19-minute speech from the White House, after which he departed without answering shouted questions from reporters. Biden referred to Afghanistan as a graveyard of empires, and realistically, it kind of is. I mean,
it is.
Back in the day, China tried to go in, didn't work out. Russia, and now us. And Biden also said that the U.S. military force would never produce a stable nation, no matter how many more years it stayed. He asked the question to anybody that was watching or listening: how many more generations of America's daughters and sons would you have me send to fight Afghanistan's civil war when the Afghan troops will not? How many more American lives is it worth? How many endless rows of headstones at Arlington National Cemetery? I'm clear on my answer, Biden said. Yep. Biden repeatedly sought to cast blame for the rapid fall of Afghanistan away from his administration, primarily now to the now deposed Afghan government and its conventional forces, which collapsed as the Taliban swept across the nation. And then I have a paragraph highlighted down here. American troops cannot and should not be fighting in a war and dying in a war that Afghan forces are not willing to fight themselves, Biden said. Right. We gave them every chance to determine their own future. What we could not provide was the will to fight for that future. Overall, that may be true. It seems like a lot of these trained forces, that we spent this time and this energy and this money on, simply once things began to go this direction, didn't bother to fight. But let's not forget, over 60,000 of these Afghan troops died attempting to, fight the Taliban, fight Al Qaeda, all of these things. So it's not that they weren't willing to fight. Maybe this group of individuals weren't, but there definitely was people in this country that are willing to fight. And I'm willing to bet right now today that there are still thousands of people that are willing to try for something better.
Yeah, I think going back to President Biden's statement, I wholeheartedly agree with that. I agree that how many more lives? How long are we going to do this? And it's not sustainable. And if the experts have been saying, and really anybody who thinks about this thing rationally, like from the beginning, how long was it really realistic to stay there? I think that the problem now is, and of course this is going to sound like Captain Hindsight, and nobody wants to be Captain Hindsight. The problem is now, did we exit in the right fashion? And if you go backwards in time, the Obama administration was talking about, actually before that, the Bush administration was talking about the exit plan. The Obama administration was talking about exiting. Trump was talking about exiting, and now Biden's talking about exiting. Is there an easy way to do this? Back to my conversation before, I think that the biggest concerning factor that most Americans are seeing is that now all of these weapons and supplies are just sitting in the enemy's hands. Perhaps we could have done something a little bit better there. Again, I am not a military strategist. I don't know how. I don't know what you would do with that. Could they have seen this coming? I don't know. We've got a comment up on the screen, Tim. I don't know if you want to walk through that.
Yeah. So Chet on YouTube asks, the Afghan army didn't even take up the fight. Could they have been secretly working with the Taliban all along? I would be willing to bet that there were definitely members of these police and armed forces that, 100% had allegiance to the Taliban as well. But I would say that I would venture to guess at least 75% of these individuals did want something better for the country. It just so happens that once the Americans began to pull their troops, the Taliban really didn't see any reason not to attempt to retake the country. And once that began, the troops who were willing to fought. They were quickly met with demise. And, the rest of the individuals decided we'll just back off, let them take it again.
And I think, frankly, a lot of them they simply don't. I mean, we've seen the videos of and of course, you always see the worst on social media. You see the videos of the people trying to do jumping jacks, the Afghan troops trying to do jumping jacks, and they're all discombobulated, and they're all, compared to a platoon of well-trained U.S. Marines, you know what I mean? They look like they just came in off the street, and that might be the case. You also have to remember that these people may not be. It's not the same culture that we're used to here in the United States. We have a military with a warrior culture in the United States. A lot of other countries simply don't have that. A lot of other people in some of these different places that we venture to, they are farmers by trade. They are craftsmen by trade. They are villagers. They're not working in the government buildings. They're not attending college down the street and getting an engineering degree. These are not people that are in many cases coming up through military families or anything like that. And so I don't think it's readily easy to expect that any of them were going to pick up arms and form without their U.S. advisors or their allied advisors to form a formidable military force against a group of people who have historically, when I say historically, I mean, look up the history of Afghanistan. It is the graveyard of empires going back to like the Persians. We're talking about hundreds, thousands of years of turmoil. This is the nature of conflict. After the course of 20 years, people are tired of fighting, and not everybody's going to pick up arms like we, the American forces, want them to, or like we do. When we go out and we fight to win. Not everybody has that warrior ethos, so it might not be the same. And I think that that's probably part of what we should have planned in the exit, in the withdrawal, is how do we walk away from this? How do we get out of this without everything literally just falling apart underneath us? And perhaps this is a conversation that should have happened or was happening 10 years ago. They should have planned over the course of the next 10 years. But, again, Captain Hindsight.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're going to get back into this a little bit more.
I would, Chet, for your comment, though, the other thing I was going to say is that if you ever talk to somebody who served in Vietnam and combat in Vietnam, this same conversation is eerily reminiscent of that same conversation. And that is, I'm working with these people during the day, and at night I'm shooting at them. And it's very possible that there's a bit of a trade wind there, or a turncoat, we might call it, to use the American rebel
Benedict Arnold.
Right. There are, in some cases, their allegiance might be different than maybe how we expect allegiance to be here in the United States or in industrialized nations. Our allegiances just look a little bit different. Our political affiliations look a little bit different. And especially if some of these people are being paid to wear the uniform during the day, they're getting a couple extra bucks while they, still can go back to their farm and do whatever they want to do. Of course they're going to jump on that bandwagon. Unfortunately, it's the hard lesson that we learned. And we've been talking about this for a number of years. We're trying to institute American policies and American ways of life into other countries, and it simply doesn't work. Again, other countries have tried this in Afghanistan as well, and in other places. I mean, you saw the French resistance during Nazi-occupied Germany. People, I mean, that wasn't going to last forever either. People simply weren't going to put up with that occupation for very long. So it was a matter of time. It was just, it was met with brute force. So I think that the same thing was going to happen in Afghanistan. It was a matter of time, but some of these folks probably simply did not have allegiance to us. That's for sure.
Yeah. Let's break a little bit of this up, because Matt, you actually got me with this one. You sent me 3 links to articles that you wanted to go over. The first 2 that I pulled up were the Afghanistan articles, so I just assumed that the third one was also going to be an Afghanistan article. But the title got me as soon as I started reading it. Your baby is ugly. 6 ways you accidentally insulted your interviewer and lost the job. So obviously, this article is not about Afghanistan, but it does go hand in hand with what most of the time the podcast covers. So it says, so why didn't you get the job? And it lists the 6 here. So number 1, your baby is ugly. When you've jumped out of planes, sailed the 7 seas, brought water to refugees during a natural disaster, and literally worked for world peace, the job in the burbs might look mundane in comparison. Letting that show in an interview is a big mistake. So don't underestimate how important our work is to us, Kiefer said. It is our life's work and our source of income, our purpose. Don't call our baby ugly if you want to be part of the family. So it's not great to think, I'm so awesome. I just served, 4, 10, 12, 20 years in the military. I'm the best. They obviously need to hire me. And when you go to your interview, you're like, whatever. I'll just come in and do some things for you, and you love me. Yeah. That's not how it goes. You have to understand that you're a job seeker. You should want the job. Show, go out there and hunt for it a little bit. You know? They want you to want them.
I could do that. I've done harder things. You are essentially insulting the person who is trying to give you a job. And it talks about this later in this article, that they want you to be part of a team. They don't want you to be the outlier who thinks that they're the best at everything like that.
Yep. And then number 2, anything you can do, I can do better. A big pet peeve of many networking contacts and hiring managers is when a service member tells them, I can do anything. And really, I mean, most service members can. They're very well versed in a whole bunch of different tasks and skills. So you think this is showing your versatility and adaptability, 2 soft skills that hiring managers say they want. So what's their problem? Well, we just talked about this last week. More and more jobs are not hiring for that person that can do 10 different jobs. They're looking for the one person that can be an expert at the one job. They don't need a guy who's okay at electrical work and okay as a plumber and okay as an auto mechanic. They need the best auto mechanic they can find. They need the best electrician they can find, the best plumber they can find. So don't go in there and say, well, man, I can do whatever. No, say, this is the specific thing I can do, and I can do it better than 95% of the people you're going to talk to.
Yeah, it's great to be hired, and when you're hired inside of a business, and when you go to work there, to be a utility player. Like I do that in my job. I'm specialized in one thing, but when somebody needs help with something that's not really my specialty, I still can jump in because I have expertise there.
Mm-hmm.
But showing up to the interview again and saying, "Hey, I can do whatever. I'm a utility player. I'm awesome." That's going to be a yellow flag or a red flag.
Yeah, focus on getting the job first and then begin to show those skills and that
Right.
utility player mentality. And they're gonna view you as an even more valuable asset.
And this is what I tell people. I actually just had this conversation this morning and yesterday with two different candidates. And it was that it's not this job you want anyway. Whatever job you're plugging into at this point, right at this moment, it's not this job you want. It's what carries you forward in 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years. So bear that in mind. Get your foot in the door somewhere first. Go in and say you could be a utility player, but ultimately interview for the job for which you've applied or the job for which you're going after. And then once you're in the door, look down the road 2 or 3 years and say, hey, I can do a lot more here. I can be a utility player. That's where companies start paying you more money, is when you become specialized in a couple of different things or they already know that you're a known quantity.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Number 3, can't you speak English? So I know that, especially the fresher the military member is, the more boot they are. If they've just gotten out of boot camp, you can look at an individual. Man, they got the high and tight. Every time they walk, it looks like they're marching. When they stop, their hands are behind their back, or they're almost standing at attention. Those are things that were not necessarily beat into you, but it was drilled into you over and over and over again. So some of those things can be hard to lose. And one of those is some of the vernacular. So as you make your way out of the military and start, looking to become a professional, we need to transition that speech, that talk a little bit. So when an interviewer asks you, so what'd you do in the military? I was a 1371. 98% of interviewers out there can be like, what? I'll be like, oh.
Even if they were in the military, nobody
Yeah.
knows what that. I mean, when I hear other Marine Corps MOSs, I don't know what they are.
Yeah. Well, the 0300s, you knew they were infantry, things of that nature. But anything beyond that in the 1300s, like
what, 2172. Hey, listen, I was a 1371 stationed out at 1st CEB, 1st Mardiv.
Yeah.
So you should want, yeah. You know what that means. That doesn't mean anything. It literally doesn't mean anything. And the same thing applies for your resume as well. When you're putting down that you were signals in the Army, for example, this is one that I see all the time. Signals intelligence. Nobody knows what that means. Nobody outside of the military really knows what that means. If you want to get into IT or technology, then you need to put that on your resume. But being in signals, I started out as a signals officer. Even people in the military outside of the Army don't always know what that means. So just bear that in mind. The military is a really big place. We're talking 1.5 or more million people that are active duty in the military. 7% of the U.S. population are veterans. It's tens of millions of people. There's a lot of us, and most of them don't know what some of that vernacular is. So just bear that in mind. Go in and talk to people like assume that they don't know what you're talking about. And I always explain to people what I did in the Marine Corps. I was a combat engineer. I blew things up, and we built things and we shot guns. And then I'll go into more detail if they want to know more detail. But I don't just end with combat engineer. It means nothing.
Yeah. It also says maybe learn some of the language of the industry you're trying to get into. So, like this P&L, profit and loss, ROIC, return on investment capital, B2B, business to business, B2C, business to customer or consumer. Just some of these KPIs.
EBITDA.
Yeah, EBITDA.
EBITDA is one of those. EBITDA is one of those words. Like I didn't know what that was until just a few years ago, relatively recently, and it was a word that I never used until I got into a business development role, and we started talking about making profits and generating revenue, and then EBITDA became relevant to me. So there are, just like the military, there are acronyms, there are names, there are words out there. You just got to get familiar with them. And if you don't know, if somebody mentions EBITDA in an interview, if you don't know what it is, say, hey, I'm unfamiliar with that term. Funny thing is when you explain EBITDA or return on investment, it makes perfect sense. ROI might not mean anything to you if you haven't used that term.
Yeah. I would say 3.5, almost 4 years ago is the first time I heard EBITDA, and I go, what? Somebody quickly explained it. I'm like, oh, yep, got it. So number 4, you take an hour to cook minute rice, dude. Now, we all know that there are times where the military can be extremely fast paced. Matt and I both know from being in the Marine Corps, there are times where it's fast paced, fast paced, fast paced. Wait. And then you're just sitting around. Happens. Now, there are plenty of industries in the civilian sector that are very fast paced. There are also plenty of industries where the workflow isn't so, gotta go. So that transition, that coming from the military, looking for that fast paced job, it might not be it. I think we see a lot of veterans get into, law enforcement. And sure, there are moments and times where your heart's racing, that adrenaline's pumping, there is go, go, go. But the vast majority of the time, officers are just kind of hanging out, making sure things aren't going the wrong direction. It is not a whole lot of action for officers.
Paperwork and stuff.
Yeah. So some of these veterans that get out of the military think, I'm going to go be a cop and I'm going to be the baddest cop out there. That's great. You are also going to sit in your patrol car for hours at a time. If anything does happen, then like Matt said, there's going to be tons of paperwork stacked on top of you, filling these things out, and you hope you get it all right. So and just understand. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say the other thing that I took away from this bullet here is that I've interviewed people like this who are, we talk about the op tempo, we talk about how fast or how slow things happen. And their attitude was, well, in the military, I do that faster, or I can do that better, or I can do, we did that amount of work before 9 o'clock in the morning. And it's like, that's great. That's really good to hear. However, just like the military in corporate America, projects and teams work as fast as the slowest element of that team. So if you are hamstrung by policy or red tape or yellow tape or any of that stuff, you're not going to be in there like, hey, in the military, we just kick doors down and assaulted the objective. That's not how it works out here. So you can talk about that in the interviews. You can talk about how fast you can get things done. But the fact is that the people who have been doing it for longer than you have know better than anybody else that you're going to be hamstrung sometimes, that it doesn't matter how fast you did it in the military. You got to work the way the policies work.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So number 5, let me tell you what you want. So this is essentially you get that young veteran in the room with the interviewer, and the interviewee is essentially saying, well, I'm the greatest ever. You're going to love what I can do. This is everything I've ever done, da, 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 da. And everything that individual's ever done may not relate to the job they're interviewing for. And that is 150% not what the interviewer is looking for. So this is saying that when an interviewer essentially gives you the asks, brings up the skills needed to perform the job they're interviewing for, or the job description, they are saying to you, I need you now to answer to me how you have these skills, or present to me examples of things you've done that directly relate. Steer it back. Matt, you've brought it up countless times already on this podcast about when you're looking at a job description and you're filling out your resume, make that resume match that job description. Same thing in the interview. You make that resume match. That's probably the reason you got the interview. Don't go in there and get off course from the direction your resume is pointing. Stick to what the resume says. Stick to the point. Stick to what matters.
Yep. And if they start talking about things, and this is again in this article, they talk about this a little bit. If they get off track, or there's something that they say, hey, we really need you to be an underwater basket weaver, and you're like, hey, I have very limited experience in underwater basket weaving. However, I have managed teams that do underwater basket weaving. You always want to bring it back to the point that they're discussing. You always want to bring it back to what they need from that bullet during that part of the conversation. So sometimes you will. I mean, I've been in interviews for jobs that I've received, for offers that I've received, where there was maybe a piece that they were discussing, like, hey, can you do X, Y, and Z? And my answer is no. I don't have any familiarity with that. However, I have worked in and among teams that are working on that. I have a general sense of how it goes. And thusly, I'm willing to learn, or I'm able to learn, and I'm technically savvy, and I'll figure out how to do underwater basket weaving. But at this point, this is the other thing. You don't want to tell them, I don't know anything about that, and leave it there. If it's 1 out of 20 things in that job description that you can't do, frankly, tell them that. Tell them you're after the ability to learn that skill or whatever that is. I'll learn that. I will go pursue the necessary components to be able to be good at that. But I'd like to come back to this because I can do 95% of what you're asking me to do.
Absolutely. And then number 6 is just, hi, I'm Captain Obvious. So essentially, and I've had this question a handful of times in interviews, is, they'll ask you what you know about the company, and then they'll say, if you had the ability to, is there anything you would change with the company? This is where you kind of got to walk on eggshells a little bit. You don't want to go out there and be like, well, everything you're doing on this production line is absolutely ridiculous. Or, these widget you make, that's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. They don't want that. They're looking for constructive criticism. I noticed on my way in that some of your delivery trucks are just now leaving. It's 3 p.m. Is there any way we might be able to look at getting some of these delivery trucks out sooner in the day? I know that in another 2 hours, most companies are going to be closing their doors down for the day. Maybe make this job a little bit easier on the delivery drivers, things of that nature. It's productive criticism. You don't want to just point out that what they do is dumb, or it smells weird in here, or things of that nature. They're looking for people that can be part of a team, that can, coexist amongst coworkers and peers, and be able to give and receive productive criticism.
There have been a bunch of bullet points that have floated around LinkedIn and social media over the past few years that talk a little bit about this point of view, and that is that it doesn't matter how high performing your top performer is. If that person is toxic to the team, the company should get rid of them. And that's a general consensus that the team has to work the way the team works. It doesn't matter if you have one top performer and they're out there like blowing everybody away. And you see this in the movies, the spy movies where there's like the awesome badass spy, and then there's 5 other like bumbling spies that work alongside of them. And everybody wants to work with the awesome badass spy. But at the end, it turns out that awesome badass spy can't accomplish the mission. And I use this as an example because I've seen so many spy movies like this. But at the end of the day, you have 10, 15, 20 people that you're employing and paying to do a job. And then you have the one hot shot who's like, well, I can do everything better. And they might be a top performer, but they are toxic to the culture of that organization. And eventually that catches up. Toxicity inside of a culture, inside of a team catches up, and you will have your 90% top performers leave at some point in time too. And they'll go become top performers somewhere else. So you don't ever want to lose sight of the whole team element. And that is the people who are even producing at 90%, 5 of them are better than one top performer who is a jerk.
Absolutely. So yeah, that was a fun little article. You got me with the headline there with the caption. It was interesting. And if you're interested in checking this article out yourself, it is on military.com. Hairless cat on superimposed on a baby in a stroller. As the picture that goes along with the title here. So
when I clicked into it, I actually thought that it was going to be like how you handle the situation where somebody's showing you pictures of their kid, and you're like, oh yeah, that kid's really cute. I
didn't call anybody's baby ugly, but over the weekend, like I said, I was in Canton. Buddy of mine, we decided we'd go out for a hibachi dinner Saturday evening. Yeah, Saturday evening. And so it was just the 2 of us, but we got sat with 3, 4, 5, 6 other people. So we're sitting there at this hibachi. I have a young man in his late 20s sitting beside me, who I thought to be his girlfriend or significant other, sitting beside him next to an older gentleman. As the waitstaff came and took orders and things of that nature, this young lady decided to let the waitstaff know that it was the older gentleman's birthday, that he was turning 60, and that he would very much like a cake. You could tell the older man was definitely not into this. He didn't want her to tell them anything. So I got into a conversation with them, and without prior to me asking any questions, I just assumed that the young man sitting beside me, who was Caucasian, was the son to the older man sitting in the middle of the table, who was also Caucasian. So I said, is this your dad? And the young lady, who was an Asian American, decided to let me know that no, in fact, it was her dad, and she is 100% not adopted. So obviously her mother had to be Asian. I then had that foot in the mouth moment. I just, damn, I just assumed, and I probably should not have done that. Felt like an ass.
I just stay out of people's. I always joke around my wife. I'm like, I just have nothing to do with anybody because I never want to jump into somebody's conversations.
That's the thing is normally I don't know you. I'm really not going to talk to you. I mean, if it's hey, the food's good. Yeah, it is. I'll say something like that, but I'm normally not like that. And the one time I tried to do it, immediately stuffed my foot in my mouth.
Right.
It's fantastic.
100%. I have been there and done that a few times. But I thought that this article was going to be like, how do you deal with interesting situations like that? Like, look at little Billy's costume for Halloween, and you're like, it's terrible. Yeah. You made that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a sheet over the kid with some eyes cut out. And like, he's a ghost.
He's a ghost. No, he's not. He's an elephant. Oh, yeah. You made that costume.
Oh, yeah. I see that now. Yep, 100%.
Right.
So let's get back into some of this talk about Afghanistan. So I've pulled up the timeline over the past 20 years. So let's talk about this a little bit. September 11th, 2001. Obviously, everybody knows what happened that day. Al Qaeda carried out an attack on the World Trade Center as well as the Pentagon. There was another flight that they believed to be headed towards the White House, Flight 93. The Al Qaeda leader, Osama bin Laden, was identified as the individual responsible. And at the time, Osama bin Laden was in Afghanistan, which at the time was ruled by the Taliban, and the Taliban refused to hand Osama bin Laden over to the U.S. So on October 7th of 2001, the U.S. launched airstrikes against Afghanistan in retaliation. Some 1,300 U.S. troops arrived in Afghanistan in November, and by December, the Taliban was removed from power. So initially, we went in, brute force, knocked the opposing force right off the pedestal. And by December of 2001, it was now, okay, so what's next? What are we going to do here? So 2000 to 2009, the number of U.S. troops in Afghanistan topped 67,000. In 2009, the U.S. President Barack Obama announced a troop surge. This number increased to over 100,000 troops in country. So now, over these 8 years from 2001 to 2009, we began to plan how we're going to transition the country back to the people of Afghanistan. We started trying to help them build police forces, try to help them build a government, hold elections, things of that nature. 2011, Osama bin Laden was killed in a special operations raid in Pakistan. 2013, 3 key figures of the Pakistani Taliban were killed in U.S. drone strikes. 2015, U.S. troops declined to about 9,800. Then in 2017, President Donald Trump deployed additional troops. The number went back over to 14,000. And then in 2018, we began having talks with the Taliban. So this is when President Trump decided it was time to reach out to the Taliban, start negotiations, peace treaties, things of that nature. September 9th, 2019, intense escalation and Taliban attacks and bombings killed a U.S. soldier. Trump pulled away on the talks. In 2020, the U.S. and Taliban signed a peace deal. February 29th, 2020 is when that peace deal was signed. I believe we were supposed to pull out. This was supposed to all happen back in May. So 2021, well before American withdrawal started, the administration there in Afghanistan looked like a loose confederation of different fiefdoms. I don't know that word. What glued them all together was the American troops. So once it was clear that America was leaving, the cracks in the administration began to widen. April 14th, U.S. President Biden announced U.S. troop withdrawal from Afghanistan starting on May 1st and ending September 11th, bringing America's longest war to a close. And then we all know what has happened. So we're a little bit ahead of that September 11th date. But what I wanted to say, and these are my thoughts, my feelings, is, right now, and the article we talked about a little bit earlier, President Biden spent a lot of time trying to deflect from his administration. And I'm not going to go with Joe here because Trump did it. Obama did it. Bush did it a little bit. We've had 4 administrations now, one passing it on to the next. And Biden made the statement he wasn't going to pass this on to a 5th president. But what I dislike the most is the finger pointing from people that are supposed to be the greatest leaders in the world. A great leader wouldn't finger point, wouldn't deflect, wouldn't blame others. A great leader would accept responsibility for what has happened and begin to build and work on ways to make things better. I think it's childish. It works against progress. We've had 4 presidents, hundreds of members of Congress and Senate who have now all been involved in this. And these are the individuals that need to accept the blame, because outlined in this timeline, this is not a military failure in any way, shape, or form. The military did their job. These men and women that have fought in this country, in Iraq, in Vietnam, in any conflict over the years, they've done their job. The U.S. military does its job, and they do it really damn well. They went in there and within a month removed the Taliban from power. That's what their mission was. But once that was done, there wasn't really an answer of what's next. And at the time, it was Bush and Obama. There wasn't a solid plan in place. We went in, we did our job. Now we're just waiting orders. We talked about that earlier too. Go, 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 go. Mm-hmm. Now it's time to wait. You know, so anybody that served in Afghanistan, I understand how you can say it was all for nothing. It really wasn't. You did your job and you did it damn well. So don't feel bad about, thinking that was a waste. You were given orders. You withheld up to those orders and you did what you had to do. Anything beyond that is not on you. It's on these politicians, these policymakers, and these decision makers. This is their downfall. They did this. So please, any veteran, don't think you had anything to do with this. I also know that, what was it? Bo Bergdahl, years ago, Obama gave up, I think, 5 members of the Taliban forces
from Gitmo.
For our one guy. Yeah, we got one. It was a 1-for-5 deal.
Who was a deserter, by the way.
Yeah. A big stink was raised over that. I'm going to leave my feelings out of that one. But, and this is much less known, honestly, but I know President Trump gave upwards of like 400 members of the Taliban back, to try to get these peace talks, going. At the time, I'm guessing here, I would imagine that at the time, the big hot news button topic was the impeachment and the trials and trying to get the president at the time impeached. So something like this just didn't hit the headlines. It wasn't that we talk about the 24-hour news cycles. Whatever the hot button topic is, what's going to keep, viewers glued to the TV screens is all they're going to talk about. So this wasn't, at the time, they thought nobody's going to care. We're just going to keep talking about this impeachment. So I remembered hearing about this, just, it kind of went in one ear and out the other, but I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I think, and I wish maybe the country would kind of want to pull back, but I know that's not going to be how it goes. I wish that sometimes we would just focus on ourselves for a while, not go and try to spend all this money and all these resources, and it's going to cost lives. But it's just not the way things go. After Korea, we wanted to be like that. We wanted to, hey, let's just step back. Let's focus on America. And then Vietnam kicked off. And okay, now Vietnam's over. Let's focus on what we're going to do. And there was a good long block there where there was small little skirmishes, but then the first Gulf War.
Right.
And let's not be foolish here. There is a whole industry based off the military.
Right.
So much money. It is the military complex. It is 100% true. The military industrial complex. There is money to be made when the U.S. military is involved in a conflict. I think it's just a matter of time till another one pops up that they can sell us on and send young men and women away so others can make money. That's how I feel.
We don't, and Tim, we don't typically talk politics on this podcast, by design, because it's kind of like a headbutt. Nobody wins. It's all a matter of opinions. And I think that this conversation is the reason why we're having this conversation is because it's not partisan. It's not political necessarily. It's about politics. It's about politics.
There are
it's not partisan.
two Republican presidents, two Democratic presidents over this 20-year span,
right.
And I'll blame all four of them.
Right. And beyond that, to your point, which I think was really well said, the military does its job. When we've served, for those of us, we have a lot of friends who have served and worn the uniform. It even goes beyond just following orders. I don't even like that statement. I don't like saying that because when we receive orders, like we're not out just arbitrarily doing things because somebody in Washington told us to. What we're doing is accomplishing missions or the commander's intent. And that generally was fighting the enemy, or it was in a lot of cases returning fire. It was in defense. And so when we talk about, I like to get away from the idea that we are just out there following orders. Hey, I saw somebody comment on the C-17 pilots. Well, why were they just flying away when people were attached to the airplane? Well, a couple of reasons. One, that their mission is to get out of there. They can't stop. It's dangerous for all parties. But secondly, would they have even known that? I don't think so. And it goes beyond them just following orders. They had to make a decision to get out of there and probably didn't know people were attached to the aircraft. But that's a microcosm of the larger thing that goes on here. The military, all the branches of the military have done their jobs. All the men and women who have served honorably have done their jobs. This is, again, eerily reminiscent of what happened in Vietnam. It's eerily reminiscent of the conflict in the early 90s in Desert Storm. And Korea before that. I mean, if you look at Korea, that was a well-fought battle, and it's largely forgotten. It's called the Forgotten War, the Forgotten Conflict, because we're not making movie after movie about it like they did for Vietnam and like they are for Iraq and Afghanistan. But I think at the end of the day, this has become the finger pointing, the breakdowns, the failures. It is all because everything is a constant political campaign. It's a popularity contest now. It's no longer about what's right and wrong. It's about how can I keep my group in power? How do we have more control? How do we make more money for our friends? And I've never been one to talk about this either. I am not one of those like evil corporation people. I'm not at all. I think if you can go out and make cash and you can develop a product or a service that is better and everybody wants to spend billions of dollars on it, then more power to you. That's America. Everybody should have that opportunity to make a little bit of cash. What I don't like is when we start making conversation or we start making conflict, putting people's lives on the line for ultimately what becomes sort of what's the end game? And the end game here this is why so many of the veterans of Afghanistan are so frustrated. They are watching the work that they put into this. They're watching the names of their friends who have been hurt or killed, the times that they've missed childbirths and graduations from high school and their kids' milestones and their family milestones and all this stuff. It all ends one day on the news on CNN with an airplane flying down the runway with people attached to it and hundreds of millions of dollars of U.S. weapons and equipment falling into the wrong hands. That's how it ends for everybody. And after a couple of days, this will be gone from the headlines. The media will forget about it because it's not convenient, because it doesn't always look good for whoever they're sort of lapdogging at the moment. Yeah. And that is the frustrating part for a lot of people who have served there. And I'm not putting words in anybody's mouths.
Chet comes back with another comment here off of YouTube. I think it's the way that Biden is withdrawing, no planning, leaving no diplomacy or support, and no consult with allies. This is one of those subjects where it appears to be that way, but those are conversations that really so many of us, so few of us are really privy to. I'm sure that the White House had spoke with somebody and let them know, the September 11th date was out there. Win, lose, or draw, it seemed by September 11th, this was going to happen. We were going to pull everybody out. So I don't know if there was advanced talks of, hey, we're a little ahead of schedule. We're going to go ahead and push through with this a little early. Uh, I would have. There had to have been some sort of plan, at least for us to leave. I don't. It sounds like, in the president's own words, it kind of sounds like there was no support plan in place.
Yeah,
we're gonna walk away, and once we're on the other side of that door, if that house catches on fire, it catches on fire.
There's another article out here that is UK's Boris Johnson is accused of complacency over Afghanistan retreat, and basically it says that he was at the mercy of what the United States was doing. You know, to play devil's advocate, Tim, I think that another conversation that could be had here is that somebody set this arbitrary deadline. And I say arbitrary because I don't know where the deadline came from other than the 20-year anniversary of 9/11. Somebody set an arbitrary deadline, didn't really have a very good plan in place. And they said, we've got to meet the deadline, which is now in less than a month. Mm-hmm. And so they're trying to meet that deadline for the sake of coming back. And this is why I say it's a constant political campaign. For the sake of coming back to their campaign in 2 years, when campaigning starts for presidencies and Congress and Senate and et cetera, the cycle of elections, they're going to say, hey, we met the deadline. Mm-hmm. Now, the problem with that is that a lot of this will be met with, or a lot of that rhetoric will be met with, you met the deadline, but it's kind of like building a house and saying like, hey, your house is going to be done by September 11th. It might not have a roof on it. The plumbing will be shot. Yeah. And the floor, you're going to fall through the floors. Well, you didn't build a house then. You didn't generate a product. The other point I'll make, and I know we're running under the clock here, is that if we did this in business, we would all be fired.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the other, and again, I'm not talking about politics in general. I'm talking about the execution of things in general. If we applied the same rules that we have in operating government and operating foreign policy, and this goes back to every president, every administration forever. If we did any of that the same way we operate business, we'd all be without jobs. And we can't execute business that way. It simply doesn't work. Now, some people might argue, well, the government's not business. I agree and disagree. It's still making policy and executing plans. It's still working with money and budgets and people. It's all the same facets of day-to-day operations. Sure, it's not a business, it's not a for-profit entity to be in government, or at least it's not on paper. Yeah. But it is effectively the same management of resources. If you can't do that effectively, it becomes a conversation that American voters and politicians need to start. And they're having this, but the American voter needs to say, hey, the next time an election comes around and the next time I get to vote for a person or a policy or administration, what do I want out of this? And we are typically pitted 1-on-1. We get two people to pick from, and they both might be the worst stuffed sandwiches, to be nice. But you get to pick from one, and then they make us think that one is better than the other. And that's what happens when you don't have a viable third party. You're just, you're picking from one of two things.
Matt, you nailed it there, because I was going to bring up that it is my personal belief that until there is a third option, there's no reason for the other two to stop doing what they've done. And in my opinion, you're voting for a sheep or a sheep, you're voting for a wolf or a wolf in sheep's clothing. Right. Really, they're the same. One just has a prettier dress on. That's all it is.
It just depends on what you sort of want. It's the constituents that really make the difference. It's if you're like, well, I really like this person because of one issue that they cover, or because I don't like the other guy. Mm-hmm. Like that's what happens. That's what ends up happening. And then we get stuck with, this will all be washed under. In 2 weeks, we won't be talking about this. Yeah. The media won't be talking about this. But the problem, and that's one of the bigger issues too, is that we, the American voters, we wash these things away. We simply pretend like they didn't happen after a couple weeks, and then when it comes time for the election, we've forgotten about how we felt about or how we should have felt about these situations.
Yeah, Matt, you're 100% right. The next time there's a big award show, it'll be headline news, and this will be forgotten.
Right. And we'll be talking about Hollywood for some reason.
Yeah. So-and-so wore a certain dress, and it just happened to be the same dress somebody wore 5 years ago at an award show, and now we're going to get to see who wore it better. No one cares. But hopefully, just start looking at third options in elections. Maybe you'll find somebody you never know.
And I'll say this as well before we close it out. We're going to continue to talk about this topic. We have a couple of guests coming up in coming weeks who have either served in these theaters or might bring some strong opinions. We simply couldn't book them this fast. But keep an eye out. If you tuned in this time and you enjoyed this conversation, we're going to continue to have a couple of veterans of Iraq and or Afghanistan on the show, one of which is currently serving still. Yeah. So we'll continue this conversation. We'll get to hear a little bit more about the topic at hand.
Yep, absolutely. And just once again, anyone who has served over there in Afghanistan, thank you for the job you did, because you did your job. And that's commendable. You did not fail. Please know that. As always, you can find us on all social media platforms. You can find us on all podcast platforms. Give us a like, rating, review, subscribe wherever you can. Let a friend, let a family member know about this. We'd love to hear from more people and see more people tuning in and listening. With that being said, I wish there was a happier way to end this, but it's been a fun conversation despite the topic. It's been an interesting conversation. And I look forward to the future conversations on this and many other things right back here on the Beyond the Wire podcast.